Welcome for this week's lecture. I'm very, very happy to be joined today by Bill Burch. Bill Burch is a very interesting individual. When Cynthia and I were in Thailand a couple of months ago, we had some wonderful conversations with Bill. He's a world traveler. He's somebody who's got a very unique set of experiences in Texas, not only as people have seen from the bio, running for some very interesting positions in office, but also um, has his finger on the pulse to a. There's a lot of crises. There's obviously a lot of crises hitting the world, hitting humanity. Some of them are fake crises that were being sold to modify our behavior according to certain computer models. Other things are crises that nature has thrown at us that are legitimate crises we should be thinking about. You know, that's part of being a human in the universe. There's always challenges, always things to overcome. Um, then there's just crises that are man-made, completely avoidable, completely resolvable if we even acknowledge that the crisis exists. That's the first condition. So Bill brought one of these things to my attention, to Cynthia's attention, and just it really, really surprised me that there was this giant issue boiling and bubbling away under the surface, literally and figuratively, in Texas, and the issue stretches beyond that, as we're going to come to see. That deals well, I'm not gonna say deals with anything. Bill is here. Bill's gonna explain exactly what this is, and we're gonna open up like usual for a Q&A afterwards. And everybody who would like to throw a question at Bill once the formal presentation is done, like usual, put your name in the description box and I will call upon you accordingly. Bill, thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you, Matt. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share to your audience and listeners the thing they probably have never thought and did not know existed is the America's biggest super fun environmental toxic legacy is being built as we speak. And let me give a little background. So in the oil and gas industry, when we produce oil and gas, we typically get a barrel of water for every barrel of oil. Maybe we get 10 barrels. And in some circumstances, we produce 99.999% water to every barrel of oil or gas that comes out of the ground. And it's still economically viable. Now, with this water, I want to be very clear. This is water that is hypersaline. That means it has extraordinarily high salinity, 4, 5, 6 times seawater thresholds. And it also contains toxic heavy metals, arsenic, mercury, tin, cadmium, some rare earth metals, lithium, vanadium. There are some recoverables out of it, but it also contains radioactive isotopes, the radium 226 and 228 series, which are alpha and beta emitters and are unfortunately once ingested, which is their only means of contamination for us, is also very toxic. Plus, the issue here is that this water that we produced historically prior to 2008, what everything we produced, well, let's back up. When we first started producing oil and gas, we produced it at surface. We put it in surface pits, and the water basically drained straight into the aquifers. So there's lots of areas where historically there is a lot of issues with oil and gas production and contamination and pollution. Since the 1950s, we don't realistically have unlined surface pits. There's still some places on Earth where we do, places like California and such. But what's happened is that generally, when we get a barrel of oil out of the ground and a barrel of water out of the ground, we re-inject the water back into the reservoir. So think of it like a balloon. You have a certain volume you take out, and then you're trying to make up for that volume square you took out. You add a little, you get some of the water out, so you add that water back, and then we often add more water to it to refill the reservoir, make the balloon the same size. So that's the way we've been operating until, well, 2008. And then 2008, as you might be well aware, we had what was called the shale revolution. The shale revolution allowed us to unlock resources out of rock that are not traditionally, we would never have traditionally been able to produce. And that came through hydraulic fracturing. Well, the process of producing this rock, which is like concrete, when we break the rock open, we get the oil and we get the water. Well, the problem is you can't re-inject the water back into the same zone that you broke. So where our problem lies is that now, what do I do with the water? So traditionally, what we did was we said, well, we got older wells, we got areas where we have the ability to re-inject this water. We'll just use our working infrastructure. So from 2008 until 2010, 12, it all worked pretty well, but it was slowly getting worse. And nobody in the industry, let me be perfectly clear, nobody in the oil and gas industry foresaw the problem that was coming. So when the housing collapse and the 2008 bubble burst, oil and gas industry borrowed $4 trillion from the federal government at 0% interest through 2012, and we drilled North America. Hence why we are where we are today, thanks to 0% interest. The reality was creating all of these additional wells, we amplified and accelerated the size of the water problem. Now, what was the problem with this? We filled up our traditional wells that we were using for disposal. So we had to drill more wells. Well, initially, drilling more wells to dispose of this water below the subsurface didn't seem like a big deal. But the problem was, as we have continued to drill more and more and more over the last 12 years since, we are now at a point where literally the earth can't take it. We are injecting here in the state of Texas, to give you an idea, we produce roughly 6 million barrels of oil a day, and we inject 24 million barrels a day of water back into the ground. Now, the problem with this, and this is where the story comes in the West Texas Permian region. Now imagine the Permian is 25 million acres. I'm sorry, the West Texas region is 25 million acres. The Permian's about 9 million acres. The problem in the Permian is that 9 million acres has been drilled since the 1930s. The first wells were drilled 1924, 1926. And through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, we drilled hundreds of thousands of wells in this region. Well, the conundrum comes in is that we have all of these old wells that are, some are still operational, most are plugged, most are abandoned at this point. That what happens is that this water is now exceeding its capacity to be held safely in the zones of disposal. So it's like a whole series of Swiss cheese patterns. So in June of 2021, I got a very interesting call from a landowner in West Texas to come out and take a look at. Now, my background is a drilling engineer. I'm an oil well firefighter. And as somebody who is a global expert, I kind of said to them, what in the hell do you need me to come out to West Texas and look at this ranch for? These are old wells. These are drilled 1945 to 1970. Like, yes, they're poorly constructed. They were not well built. Like, these are 50-year-old well bores. Like, what do you want me to do about this? And what I was really shocked to see was that what's happened is that the saltwater disposal that's happened all over this 9 million acres, and plus also in East Texas and South Texas and West and North Texas, is that literally now it is not only coming to surface through these old well bores, but it's actually contaminating the groundwater. So what really shocked me after spending the summer of 2021 in this ranch in West Texas, working on the very first two, what we call now zombie wells, dead plug abandoned wells that are now back alive and flowing, is that we have over 500,000 acres of contaminated groundwater through Reeves County, Pecos County, Ward County, and Crane County. And the problem is growing. And what's the most astounding thing to me is that this is a magnitude and severity greater than Love Canal and literally has no publicity, literally is not being picked up on by anybody anywhere around the world. It's shocking because as things have progressed since June of 2021, we had in January 1st of 2022, we had the first one erupt out of a unknown well about 3 miles south of where we were working on the Antina Cattle Company ranch. And this well on this farmer's ranch went 150 feet in the air, spraying this radioactive toxic brine all over his fields. About 150 acres is permanently contaminated and destroyed. And the well is still not dead. It's been capped. Cud Well Control came out and capped the well and managed to get it secured from the surface flow, but the subsurface has never been stopped and isolated. It erupted on surface on December 7th of last year, again, 400 yards to its east, and it fractured all the way through the water table from 600 feet to surface, flowing into 3 different freshwater aquifers. The size and the scale of this problem is truly hard to get your head wrapped around. That there's literally 100,000 well bores that are acting as conduits for this high pressure, ultra toxic produced water to flow to surface. And the regulator's response is there's no problem. That's the most shocking part about it. It's like, well, what problem exists? Their answer is that, well, if we don't test the groundwater, there's no contamination. That's not a solution. Not testing the groundwater and saying there's no contamination is truly gross negligence and incompetence. And what amazes, I think, me the most out of this whole conversation is that this isn't limited to just the West Texas region. We have so we kind of like the two Venn diagrams, right? You have the older wells that are drilled that are falling apart, and then you've got this whole problem of saltwater disposal and overinjection. So how bad is the overinjection in West Texas as an example? Well, 3 of the 5 biggest earthquakes that have ever occurred in the state of Texas. And look, Texas is not a seismically active state, right? We're not on a fault line. We don't really have any kind of, we're not a San Andreas in the California region. We don't have the East Coast fractures up the Appalachia. We literally have created 3 earthquakes in the last 18 months that are over a 5.0 magnitude. Created. Not naturally occurred, created due to saltwater injection and overinjection of this produced water. It's so bad that the satellite imagery from the topography scans of West Texas has shown ground rise in certain areas of over 5 inches. The earth is lifting on its own due to this water pressure that's being ejected throughout West Texas. Now, there's areas out there that I wish people would go out and see. There's one in particular called FM 1053. The highway, in the same token of this water moving, because again, it's a dynamic system. The water's being injected at all these various points. And to put it in perspective, there's about 54,000 injection wells in the state of Texas. The water that's being injected is also washing out a lot of the subsurface, and it's washing out this salt in the process of it's moving through the subsurface. The challenge with this washing out is that in one area of FM 1053, one of our local highways, it's kind of between, if you looked at a map, there's like I-10 and there's I-20. The two of them kind of come together in West Texas, and it's kind of one of the vertical roads between the two, I-10 and I-20. The road has dropped in 1,000 feet. It's dropped 90 feet. So it's like hitting a roller coaster. You're doing 80 miles an hour in West Texas, and all of a sudden you're on this massive drop and then pickup. And again, the topography is being changed because of the overinjection of water and how much water is moving around in the subsurface. The problem here is that the industry has known about this since 2014. If you go back in time a little bit in Oklahoma, in late 14, we had a 4.3 magnitude under the Cushing oil reserves in Oklahoma. And that's a federal reserve stockpile of hydrocarbons that's stored. And that, of course, caused major risk and concern to the U.S. economy of having risk to the hydrocarbon economy. So what happened was Oklahoma had a big plea for anybody that could come out and solve the problem. Well, you know how they solved the problem? They built pipelines to western Oklahoma from eastern Oklahoma and started injecting all the water into western Oklahoma, because eastern Oklahoma, they couldn't actually solve the problem. How bad was it? They shut in 75% of the Oklahoma production to manage the water injections. And now since managing the pressures and the water injection, yes, it is actually, the earthquake thresholds have come down and the risks are greatly lower. But guess what's happening in western Oklahoma? There's earthquakes. So they didn't solve the problem. All they did was offset the problem. We have the same problem in Texas. If we were to suddenly go in tomorrow and say, let's shut off 75% of the 6 million barrels a day of production in West Texas, the U.S. economy would skyrocket in pricing because of the fact that gasoline and everything else would literally become $8 to $10 a gallon for the fact that 75% or 4 million barrels a day of production would be shut in. That'd be catastrophic. So the risk of what's happening is the regulator says there's too much money, there's too much risk involved. Screw the landowners. Now, this is Texas. In Texas, you don't say screw the landowners. The landowners reign supreme, generally speaking, in terms of sovereignty of their land and their ability to protect the resources. And what's interesting is that there's one ranch owner. His name is Schuler White. Great guy. Met him several times. He has been fighting with the state regulator, for the last 2.5 years, and he's got over 100 of these wells flowing on his ranch. Another one just opened up on his ranch about a month ago and is flowing about 10,000 barrels a day of produced water at surface. And again, killing everything in his fields. He can't run his cattle through his fields. And of course, his groundwater is screwed. The notion that the landowners no longer have any capacity of both federal regulations, the EPA won't touch it, and the fact that the state is willingly and gross negligently avoiding the liability and the risks and will not hold the operators accountable has led to basically a Love Canal, 100 times the size of Love Canal. I mean, the Buffalo scenario is trivial. The Buffalo scenario, to put this in perspective, the Antina Cattle Company ranch is 22,000 acres of land, and this is 500,000 acres plus and growing. That would be literally all of upstate New York. So this isn't a problem that's like, oh, it's just one noisy landowner in West Texas. This is absolutely catastrophically one of the biggest environmental disasters that's ever occurred in American history, and it's still occurring and still being avoided. It truly blows my mind as somebody who's been both a first responder out there and somebody who understands the implications of the economy, that we are not holding operators and we are not looking at this problem in the solution. There's nobody proposing to change anything about the way we're doing things. It's all modus operandi and continue on as we are. And we're just going to turn West Texas into a Superfund site. And for a lot of folks that say, well, where is the federal government? Why isn't the federal government involved? In Texas, the federal government signed a modus operandi to give you an understanding of how strong the Texas power base is in the oil and gas economy. The federal government signed a memorandum of understanding with the Texas Railroad Commission that all environmental laws and regulations will be enforced by the Texas Railroad Commission. The Railroad Commission is our oil and gas overseer and basically the body that's in charge in Texas for basically oil and gas production and operations. And what's amazing about this is that the federal government actually doesn't have any jurisdiction in terms of acting in Texas, which is just blows my mind. So there is no hope. There is no groundwater. If the water were to hit a navigable waterway, that would be a federal interest, then obviously the federal government would have to step in. But this is West Texas. You're not running boats out in West Texas. There's no navigable waterways, and there's no real environmental rules and laws that are held in place. So basically, this is a fight of individual landowners trying to take on big oil in a government that is complicit with basically the profiteering and liability avoidance of the big oil companies that are operating. And it is truly, I have to say, in all the time and years I've spent working around the world and all the environments I've been in. And look, I've worked in the Niger Delta. I've seen other places in the world where environmental standards aren't the highest. But I got to say, the conditions in West Texas are the worst I've ever seen. And the problem is today that there is no solution coming forward. So it's either going to do one of two things. It's either one, it's going to fracture the surface, and we're going to have a great salt lake. And some hydrogeologists have predicted that there will be a major eruption to surface at some point, that the earth will relieve the pressure, and we will basically end up with a gigantic, unusable 100,000, 500,000 million acres of unusable ground that will be basically a toxic Superfund site at surface. That's one option. Two, we end up with basically complete contamination of the groundwater and total environmental devastation for anybody to live anywhere between basically El Paso to San Antonio to Austin, and everything is screwed. And then the third option is that we actually treat the water. We actually find a technological solution to actually deal with the problem and begin to alleviate and deal with the toxic legacy. So the conundrum we have is that people aren't even aware of the size and scale of the problem. And that to me is just truly just mind-blowing that big oil and the regulators have been able to keep this under wraps for the most part. So with that, I would love to take some questions and get a little bit more into the details and see what points I didn't make clear.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions already in the queue. I got a quick one to start with. Do you know if here in Canada, where obviously a lot of there's a lot of similarities between Texas and Canada. Fracking has in many ways produced a boon. It bought us
Mhm.
some time, some abundance, but at the same time, based on the factors you brought up, there's been a destructive factor that was probably very avoidable. What would you say? Do you know if the Canadian um, picture is very similar to what you've just painted
It's
in the U.S.?
it is, and it's a little different. It's just that you guys don't produce as much water per barrel of oil and gas as we produce in the Permian, and that's a bit of geology driven.
Okay.
But the reality is that Western Canada, especially through Alberta, is heavily drilled. You have millions of oil and gas wells that are drilled that are constructed at the lowest possible cost basis and the fastest possible construction methods from the last 100 years. And the aging infrastructure of the oldest wells are not cemented worth a damn. So when we drill a well, just to be clear, we remove millions and millions of years of rock, and we replace it with a piece of steel that's not even half an inch thick. And then we pump a cement around the exterior of the steel to provide a barrier. Now, the cementing technology has changed dramatically in the last 70 years, but to be honest with you, even our best cementing technology today won't survive a century. A century from now, it will have failed. So the problem isn't always just the short term looking at this problem. It's also the fact that what's this going to look like 500 years from now? What's this going to look like 1,000 years from now? I say to folks that this is our nuclear fuel rod problem. The nuclear industry, we all know, has fuel rods in that they have a half life and they eventually kind of decline over the centuries. And 10,000 years from now, uranium 235 is basically a whole bunch of lead. Well, the problem in the oil and gas industry is that our problems double every century. So our risk goes up every century we have these holes in the ground. 10,000 years from now, there won't be a piece of steel or a piece of casing left that won't have to be re-entered. So being in Alberta and knowing the fact that you don't have the same over injection pressure, but you've got a massive legacy of wells that are drilled that weren't constructed correctly and aren't plugged correctly. And that is the global oil and gas industry's dirty secret that they don't want to talk about, is that the benefit of hydrocarbon economy has come with a 10 millennium problem that nobody wants to talk about. And there is no technology solutions. Nobody has a solution that's going to last 1,000 years. Maybe some epoxy resins and maybe running some sort of high chromium stainless steel pipe might buy us 500 years. But nobody is doing that, and certainly not at a cost basis today in construction. So the reality is that even if we're not talking about the problem today in the next 25 years of scope, at some point, there is going to have to be hundreds of billions of dollars of Canadian money allocated to re-entering, managing, and maintaining, and having to intervene on these old well bores drilled all throughout Canada and the US.
Thank you.
And there's no money. And again, that's going to be a problem. So if you take the fracking problem on top of it and you start to over inject and create abnormal pressures in the subsurface, now you're going to accelerate that problem. And that's what we're seeing in Texas. The two Venn diagrams are overlapping in terms of you have the abandoned oil well, poorly constructed problem, and now you've got this overpressurization problem.
So actually, I'll withhold my follow up question because I know there's a couple of people who want to pose something, but then I'll want to round out my thought. Kevin, are you still there?
Yeah. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Kevin.
Never heard about this problem before, so I have trouble understanding what you're saying. So I'm going to try and rephrase maybe in my own words, and you tell me where I've got it wrong. But before I do that, I just want to make sure I understand. Is it a problem that is solely on the fracking side, or it's on both technologies of oil drilling?
It's both. So
Both.
the
Okay.
fracking problem unlocked the ability to get the hydrocarbon from the rock. So the fracking isn't the causation of the overall problem. And a lot of people and a lot of environmentalists get that wrong because they say, well, fracking is the problem. No, fracking is what broke the rock in the first place. The hydraulic stimulation broke the rock apart to get the hydrocarbon production. With it came the water. The water is the byproduct of the production of unlocking it via fracking. It's the disposal element of having to manage this toxic radioactive isotope laden produced water at surface that's causing this major issue in West Texas.
Okay, so here's I'm gonna rephrase it, and yeah, you tell me if I get it wrong or right. So you have either your fracked rock, right? It's fissured and there's nothing inside, right? Because you got the oil back out of it, or you have your old oil well that were empty. Now you had to put the wastewater somewhere, so you either put it in the oil well, which is I guess it's not just like a water well, like your typical house water well. It's a little bit more complicated, or you put it in the fractured rock where you remove the oil. But when you do that, you have to use pressure to put the water in, right? You just can't pour it in. There's a pressure mechanism there, right?
So let me clarify one thing. So in the fracked rock scenario, imagine it's like concrete. So if you went onto your driveway and you broke the tip of your driveway, that's the equivalency of what we kind of break. And then once you have those fractures in your driveway, you would hope up your driveway, the hydrocarbon would eventually flow down your driveway into those fracture network and allow it to flow into the wellbore. We can't re-inject back into the same zone that we produce from in the fractured rock. That's the whole conundrum of the problem. It literally is the consistency of concrete. So when we originally break the well, we only break it within the near wellbore region, maybe a couple 100 feet away from the wellbore. That's as far out as we can get. So the reality is that, and that's why we drill horizontal, by the way, so that way we can break lots of zones horizontally instead of just like we would traditionally vertically. The problem with this is that when we can't re-inject back into the same concrete to get the disposal rates, we had to go back and find other ways to dispose of it. So when we looked at these older oil wells, that was our first dumping mechanism. Then we started to drill more specific wells to start putting it into other aquifers. Now, these other aquifers weren't old oil well zones. These were just water-bearing zones of brine. And we said, hey, we got plenty of room in these spaces to inject this wastewater into.
So in Texas, you were just looking for holes to put the water
anywhere you could get rid of it. Yep. Anywhere in the subsurface you could get rid of it. And since this rock in the middle of the Permian is a huge section of concrete, it's like 4,000 feet thick. There, you either have to dispose below it into the basement rock, what we call the bottom of the Permian, or you dispose of it in the above section. Now, the problem with the injection in the deep is that it's really expensive to drill, not only through all of that, but then also get all the way to the bottom. So most of the operators don't dispose of water in the deep zone. About 20% of the total production water gets disposed in the deep zones. Most of the water gets disposed of above this concrete 4,000 foot thick section. So let's say below your groundwater table. So let's say that's in West Texas, that's up to 1,000 feet. So from surface to 1,000 feet is kind of your groundwater level. And then from 1,000 feet to about 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet is your kind of disposal zones. So what's happened is that as they've dumped all of this water into those shallower intervals, the earth literally can't take the water. We are literally overpressurizing those reservoirs, those rocks, and actually breaking them, hence causing the earthquakes.
Right. So it's a pressure thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the wastewater wants to come up, and that's where it's contaminating, well, the pasture lands for the cows and all of that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's shocking when you talk about the pressure of this problem, right? The one well we capped the January 21, the January 1st of 2022 geyser well. It's called the Crane County Geyser. You can go on Google and look it up. Great photos. It shut in at 300 psi at surface. And understand, your city, it's a 4-inch well bore, and a 300 psi is the equivalent of a fire hydrant in any given city environment. This is a massively charged system. This isn't like saying like, oh, it's got a little bit of pressure. It's got a hell of a lot of pressure to it. And the problem is that these old well bores that are drilled all throughout West Texas are all corroded and are failing. So the pressure is also causing it now to flow sideways into the groundwater. So even though it's shut in at surface, the reality is the steel that was put in place in 1950, 1960 is corroded. The cement is failed. And now it's allowing pathways for it to escape with outside the wellbore.
Okay, so it's pushing this way and this way.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, I have other questions, but I'll wait before.
Arlen and Cynthia, you guys, oh, you're on mute. Everybody's by default on mute. I see your little 1 minute finger there, Cynthia. There you are. Okay.
There we go. There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. I find this utterly fascinating. I'm in Alberta. And my parents' company, which is giant now, is in oil and gas and has expanded from Alberta to Texas, Houston, as well as Australia and Costa Rica, I, though, am a farmer. My grandparents were farmers. And so there's this conundrum about, you can imagine.
I got it already. Yeah.
So, and also too, I'm old enough that I remember in the late 70s, we had a sour gas well go bad in Alberta for months, and Red somebody.
Red Adair. Yep.
Red Adair. So I'm kind of, I look at you with starry eyes because Red, was the hero. And so you put out fires, la, 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 la. So anyway, kudos to you. So my father is aging, my mother is gone. This company is still, family owned. And so how might I influence, and what would that be? How might I influence them specifically? I mean, it's going to be here too, but right now it's Houston, it's Texas that's really like climbing. They did at some point have business with a German company that you were talking about, some old cement, old pipe, which I get because my people do pile driving and they have a pipe mill. So they make pipe. I get that has a lifespan. They were doing a thing with a German company that would go into old infrastructure, like in cities, for example, and line old pipe water mains with ceramic. I don't know if this is helpful.
No, I know a little bit more about it because I know some of the technical part. But anyway, I don't know that it can handle the pressures that would be involved, but it was a methodology by which you didn't have to dig up the pipe. You could send machinery down the pipe and you'd find the cracks, you'd find the decayed section, and then it would do the ceramic lining. And it was a tremendous cost saver for municipalities, et cetera, because they don't have to dig up all the roads to fix all the pipes. Right. So I don't know that a technology like that could be, used in that application. And I mean, and even how far down, you have to go to find where it is leaking out into the sides and this kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I'm just filling in some of the blanks there.
You got it basically spot on. So the first thing is that I say to folks all the time, living in a first world country, we are blessed with the fact that we have low cost energy, which is the underpinning of our successive societies. We have access to clean water, and we have the ability to grow our own food. And the agricultural society that we all kind of seem to forget when we live in urban environments is that rural environments is what really drives all of our successes. And the lack of groundwater isn't just about putting it into the taps to the city folks. It's also about being able to grow crops and raise cattle and livestock healthfully,
Yeah.
right? So the notion of what we're doing from a fundamental perspective of destroying our ability to save farmland and be able to manage future generations of groundwater is probably the biggest failure of the whole process. Because again, we're sacrificing short-term, low-cost approaches to be able to profiteer over the massive cost bill that's coming in the next century and millennium to clean up the legacy of these. The second issue, and again, that has to come from a philosophical approach and people taking a ground roots approach to be able to address what are we doing to protect groundwater, and that means protecting. So one thing I would like to clarify is that in saying protecting groundwater, all of the regulatory bodies will say, well, that's why we run surface casing. We run this first string of pipe exactly for that purpose, to be able to protect groundwater. Well, the problem is that after you plug and abandon these well bores, you've cut off oftentimes the internal strings of pipe that prevent any kind of communication from deeper. And theoretically, there should be plugs between the deeper, higher pressure zones and the surface plugs. But the reality is that they're not there. So when we re-entered this well bore out in West Texas, there was supposedly a plug at surface that was supposed to be 15 foot thick. And this well, by the way, this Estes 24 and the Riston 68 that I worked on in June of 2021, the Riston 68 had what looked like a 1958 version of Home Depot's backyard concrete cardboard sleeve and one sack of Sackcrete in it. That was a 15-foot plug that was literally on the report to the regulatory body as what was the surface plug. And I got photos of it, and I said, that's 15 foot, huh? And nobody wanted to answer the question. So then as we went down deeper, and there's supposed to be a 100-foot plug sitting at the casing shoe into the top of the reservoir, there was nothing. We were free pass all the way down to it. And then when I challenged the regulator at the time, I said, well, let's go all the way to bottom and let's confirm the fact that at 4,000 feet that the plugs are still originally in there. They said, no, we don't have to do that. So the regulator's answer was, we'll just set another surface plug and we'll plug it from 600 feet to surface. We'll just basically cork these wells without actually providing any isolation across the whole intermediate intervals, which are all part of the problem. Again, it's the lowest cost approach of solving the problem by corking them. And my conundrum with this whole thing is that as somebody looking at this from a 1,000-year perspective, we're not going to be, this isn't a one-time deal. The notion we train all these young engineers, and when I started in the industry 24 years ago, my thought was that, well, once you're plugged a well, what's there to worry about? It's done. There's nothing else further. I designed for a 25-year life cycle. It's a production window of pressure and production for 25 years, and it's over. I plug it the lowest cost, cheapest means I can, and I move on to my next economically viable project. We never taught young engineers to think beyond what does it look like a century from now? What's it look like a millennium from now? So they're designing for things for a 25-year life cycle, much like bridges and infrastructure and other things. And then we're finding out, oh, by the way, this is the wrong cycle to design for. These are holes in the ground for the next 10,000 years. And my favorite story is to the folks in Houston that, the city of Houston, people have a tendency to forget, was founded on hydrocarbon. It wasn't because people want to live in a goddamn swamp that's humid and full of mosquitoes in South Texas, right? They founded it because it was hydrocarbon based. And there's 15,500 oil and gas wells drilled in the city of Houston limits. And I say to folks, I said, there's 300 left producing still in the city limits, right? So there's 15,200 plug wells. And I said, do you think that the operators plug these wells in Houston any better than they did in West Texas? And I would say to people on the campaigns,
in LA, there's a lot of wells. I know. Well, I've been there.
Yeah. So the thing is, and I say to folks, I said to some of the regulators in the city of Houston mayor and a few other folks, I said, let's say it only took $50,000 a well to find it, dig it up, confirm there's no trap pressure, re-enter it, and confirm the plugging. Let's just assume $50,000 a well. I said, do you have $1 billion budget set aside for oil and gas operations? And they looked at me completely stupid. And I said, you do understand somebody's going to have to pay that $1 billion bill in Harris County. It is coming due. So at what point do we as society start to address the fact that A, we have to change our design mentality, and B, we have to look at this problem at a much longer risk to our society And this is global. Much to Matt's point, this isn't just about Alberta and Texas. This is California. This is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has got Costa Rica. This is literally everywhere around the world. We have drilled oil and gas wells. We have done no better job plugging these wells than anywhere else. North Sea, Europe.
What are the Saudis doing? I mean, I guess they just have desert. Maybe they don't care. I don't know.
Well, so that's exactly the mentality. Is we say, well, I don't care. It's out in the farmer's back 40. If there's a problem out there, oh well, he's screwed. I don't really give a damn. I live in the city.
Yes.
That's the conundrum, right? But the problem is, as our societies have expanded, as Harris County has expanded to now a third ring road, and we have the Grand Parkway that's now puts the city of Houston 120 miles in diameter. Wow. The farmer's back 40 is now downtown suburbia. Yeah. And the problem with this is that we can't just assume that someday, a century from now, nobody's living there, because the reality is our societies are building out bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we're moving these resources out, we are now moving into the oil field. It's not that the oil field's moving into the city, we're moving into the oil fields. So people are surprised, for example, when Exxon had their big facility in South Texas, in south of Houston, they started, the property was actually technically listed as contaminated and not inhabitable for man or beast. They sold it off to a developer who lied on the deed, and they built 150 homes in Friendswood.
Yeah.
And now people are living over top of literally a toxic legacy of an oil and gas production facility that literally is a toxic legacy. And is there going to be surprises in 25 or 30 years when people have higher rates of cancer and there's lots of health issues? Gee, you had an oil well underneath your property. Ask your realtor when you go buy a house, by the way, is there an oil and gas wells literally on the property? Most people don't even think to ask that question. Because again, if you literally have one, you have to realize there's a risk not only to your groundwater, but there's a risk to your health. Are they plugged? They're not. So we've exacerbated the problem in West Texas because of the saltwater production problem. So I try not to confuse the two topics, because the issue of the groundwater contamination is really because of what's happening at the scale of what's happening out in West Texas. And to put it in perspective, I put a copy of the article in the chat if anybody's interested, about the very first 2 wells. But the one thing about the Antina Cattle Company Ranch is that it's a 22,000 acre ranch, 400 plus oil wells on the property. And out of that 400 wells, we've excavated 120 so far. 95 of them are flowing at surface or in a state of failure. The extent and size of the problem is absolutely unbelievable. And we're not going to sacrifice a non-hydrocarbon economy. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, we got to be anti-fossil fuel. Well, okay, you can make the argument in the anti-fossil fuel arguments. We can decarbonize maybe residential and maybe decarbonize some commercial facilities with some solar renewables, maybe, right? Nuclear. The reality is that you're not going, and the vast majority of the argument, of course, is in the transportation sector. What are you going to do about the transportation sector? Well, again, transportation sector is 50% of the global oil demand. So we produce 85 million barrels a day of oil globally. 50% of it basically goes to running engines of some degree.
Yeah.
So the other 50% of that 85 million barrels a day goes into hydrocarbon production, into plastics and paints and pharmaceuticals and all the other use cases. Well, guess what? There isn't another feedstock. So the whole notion that the anti-fossil fuel movement is that we can just get rid of it all, they're full of shit. There's no physical way we can realistically get rid of all the paints and plastics and bioproducts we use from the hydrocarbon industry. But sure, we can decarbonize certain sectors, maybe, right? But it's not a zero-sum game. So a century from now, we're still going to be producing hydrocarbons, and we got to look at the risks of how are we producing these with a longer-term legacy in mind, minimizing the environmental impact, and solving the legacy problems. How are we going to deal with all these old oil wells that weren't constructed worth a damn? And again, the ideas of something like an internal liner or some sort of ceramic coating, there's lots of folks in the business trying to come up with solutions to try to, again, minimize cost and come up with better longer-term solutions. Our fundamental problem is that there's literally in North America alone, in Texas alone, there's 1.4 million oil wells.
Yeah. No.
Right. And Alberta has got the same scale of problem.
Yeah.
We have, and that's not Oklahoma, that's not Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Kansas, Louisiana, Gulf Coast, California.
Saskatchewan's now
it
new.
Is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the problem is so big that it's like operators are saying, well, we can't afford the liability. Well, then who pays for it? So ultimately, this is privatized profiteering for socialized cleanup costs. And what people have to be aware of in this whole argument is that what we're doing is we're and even if you put a rainy day fund to the side, the reality is that there is no way in hell that you're ever going to get enough money into it to compensate for 500 to 1,000 years worth of risk tolerance for managing these wells. But that's what we're going to have to do. Our whole entire mindset and mentality around the hydrocarbon industry has got to change.
You sort of addressed this just now in your response to Arlen and Cynthia, and but I'd still like to just add to it a little bit. Susan and Doris wrote, are these the same problems occurring in other oil-rich countries like Middle East or Russia? So you kind of made a point. Yes, at least for the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, there's similar sorts of major blind spots. Would you say, I would add to that question, are there any countries that have a better handle on doing this or thinking about the future implications of the drilling, or is everybody equally blind on the earth right now, in your opinion?
So let me answer the first part. Russia does not give us any statistics on the number of events, and I'm officially a Russian certified paramilitary oil well firefighter. And I can tell you that all it took was drinking a liter of vodka with a bunch of the Russians, and I got my certification. But I will tell you that they truly hide the size and scale of the problems, and they still don't want people to know how many events, how many fatalities, and how bad the situations are all throughout Russia. China is probably even worse. We never hear about the Chinese blowouts and the events and the failures and the number of issues that have occurred in China. So knowing the fact that there are countries that we work in, North Africa, West Africa, Middle East, Europe, North America, South America, at least we have a scope of some idea of kind of where the hotspots are and kind of where things are at. But the problem is global. And I would probably say that maybe the UK has probably had the best view so far of plug and abandonment standards and trying to look at and address through the North Sea how they are going to plug these better, but they haven't done any better job. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of engineering, a lot of pilot projects, but nobody has really solved the problem. The problems in the North Sea are laughable because they like to claim that they are superior in addressing the issue. But when you really go in and look at these wells and how they were constructed in the 70s and 80s, they weren't built any better. They weren't isolated any better. In fact, places like some of the dirty secrets in Norway are places like Valhall, the big BP offshore platform. That's one of their big saving graces. BP has tried 3 times to plug and abandon that platform, and they can't, because the risk of the gas that's trapped behind the casing and the risks of the shallower zones that they drilled through, and the fact that the whole entire field is collapsing, it's actually subsiding into the ocean. They've lost about 6 meters of overall height in the platform over the years of production. They can't afford the liability if it fails. So they just put another extension for another 25 years in Valhall to offset the fact that they can't get out of it. And so what the big boys are doing is they're finding the lower operators, and this is the strategy. They're finding lower operators who will buy out their assets at cost or even at a little bit of a profit, and they hand over the liability in its entirety. So this idea that you're going to shift off smaller and smaller and smaller operators of liability until eventually the game of musical chairs is up at some point, and somebody's going to be left holding the bag on these old assets. Now, the hope is, of course, that the regulator doesn't come back and force the big boy to have to pay for the downstream failure 50 years from now, 25 years from now, if there's still a organization in existence. But the idea that we're allowing these corporations to spin off their liabilities and walk away from their abandonment liabilities is a massive risk to all of us. And we're not doing any better job. And the national oil companies like Saudi Aramco, the reality is that they ignore the groundwater contamination, and yet there's massive contamination all throughout Al-Khobar and the middle areas of the eastern province from oil and gas production and contamination. And Kuwait Look, I worked in Kuwait. I was a drilling manager in Kuwait just before COVID. Kuwait's big dirty secret is that every time it rains, now with cloud seeding and all the new changes in the environment that are occurring in the Middle East, every time it rains, the 1991 blowouts that occurred with the Gulf War, there's a 3-foot thick section of asphaltenes and tars and toxins that surface from the Iraqi invasion. And every time we go out to a location and we go to work on it and we have to push the sand back to get to the wellhead, you scrape up literally this asphaltene tar off the location. Well, every time it rains, guess what happens? It goes into the groundwater. Kuwait has one of the biggest groundwater contamination issues that KOC doesn't want to deal with because of all the surface oils that existed from 1991 Iraq. It's just below the surface, and every time it rains, it gets into the groundwater. Kuwait can't use their groundwater. They have to desalinate because the groundwater is contaminated. This is this is the reality of where we are globally with hydrocarbon production. It's not a good story. I hate to be such a Debbie Downer on it because it's like, well, fuck, we're all screwed, right? But the reality is that we have to look at the fact groundwater is a precious resource. Less than 0.5% of the world's total water is drinkable and usable. Less than 0.5%. 1.2, 1.5% of it's locked up in ice and locked up in glaciers and locked up into unusable areas. We have to look at the fact that our groundwater is one of our most precious resources that we have to protect. And yet we're sacrificing it and we're not addressing our oil and gas thirst for the risks of what we're doing to groundwater. That bill's coming due.
Richard, are you there?
I think my question got answered.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Monty.
Yes, thank you very much. Very informative, very scary moment in our history. My comments are twofold. Number one, you mentioned that the engineers of today are just geared towards short-term thinking. In other words, get her done. Like on the battlefield, you might be thinking of tactics instead of thinking strategically. And there's a term in my background is in logistics, and there's a term in logistics which is lifestyle logistics. In other words, when you're planning a major project or any endeavor, you have to think from the very conception to the design, to the planning, to the implementation, to the manufacturing, to the industry, to the power necessities, to the distribution, all the way to the end of the lifestyle. You have to think in terms of disposal. So any major project, you should be at least thinking 100, 200, 300 years in advance. And I'm looking at a map here of the Ogallala Aquifer, which stretches from North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, all the way down to Texas. It's the largest aquifer in North America. I would presume that what you're addressing here isn't just a localized problem, but the potential for, I mean, the aquifer itself, the Ogallala Aquifer has been depleting for many, many years now. In other words, we're drawing from it faster than we're replenishing it. And there was a point in our recent history, which I think could be looked at, where they were thinking of a solution. In other words, in early 1960s, Parsons Engineering and the Army Corps of Engineers had actually developed a plan for the North America Water and Power Alliance, where they actually anticipated what the potential was, what the requirements were as far as our future. So there was a time in our history where we at least attempted to think in these terms. And I would think that if we got back to that way of thinking with the nuclear technologies that were necessary for that and so forth, there is that potential, but we've got to completely change our way of thinking about how we're thinking about our future and what the actual facts is on the ground. And we're just not doing that. But could you comment on this Ogallala Aquifer, and if there is a potential for that contamination too through what you were addressing?
Yeah, so first and foremost, great questions. You're absolutely 100% right. The engineering scope of what we're training engineers to look at. Look, my mindset of somebody who had been in the business for 25 years, 24 years, and as a global expert, I didn't really get a shift until 2021 until I actually saw the problem. And I'm somebody who I think is relatively tuned in globally to the oil and gas issues. So this notion of where we've come has just started literally since 2021. My colleagues who have had 30, 40, 50 years in the industry, seeing where I've been and talking about these issues personally, have all shifted their mentality as well. So the shift is occurring. There has been a cataclysm shift of thinking of the older guys in the business saying, boy, I wish I would have done this. Boy, I screwed up on that. Boy, we made a mistake here. We should have done this. We should have looked at this. So there is this capacity. Now, the problem is, just as you said, is that the younger engineers are in a mindset and mentality of get it done. It's economic. Hoorah. Let's drill more wells. And there's not right now a way to bridge between, I like somebody's comment said, engineers and accountants run the show. Ain't that the truth? The reality is that we have to address this thinking. We do have to get back to it. Now, the idea of the 1950s, 60s progressives that saw the future and saw the need for resource allocation and planning in Ogallala, thank God, because at least we put resources and laws and legislation in place in the 50s, in Texas at least. Somewhere in the mid 50s, the state legislator did start to put groundwater resourcing and protection as a higher priority. And there has been periods in time, but we've lost it. And you're 100% correct. The shift where we're at now has forgotten about what the consequences are looking like in 10, 20, 30 years from now. People aren't designing for that. They're only designing for the short-term immediate, hey, I'm going to be on this assignment for 2 years, and 2 years from now, this isn't going to be my problem. And we do have to shift that. Now, from the Ogallala and the resourcing, I got to say, it's one of the dumbest things ever to be tying out the Ogallala to grow one of the highest water quality crops, highest water quantity crops throughout Central Texas, which is sweet corn. And people don't understand that 1 acre of sweet corn takes 660,000 gallons of fresh water to irrigate, to grow 1 acre. And we've got millions of acres of sweet corn growing, pulling water from the Ogallala to grow corn in an environment that's not suitable for it. Same thing with cotton. You know, Texas is famous for its cotton fields. Well, you know what? Cotton is equally as water-thirsty crop. We have to look at this need of water and managing the Ogallala and our agricultural society, offsetting it now with the fact that our urban environments are now taking larger and larger scopes of water. So, for example, this last summer in Texas, we had a massive drought. Areas in San Antonio and Austin now they're no longer two cities, by the way. If you haven't been recently, Austin to San Antonio is almost one metropolis. It literally, I-35 is slowly merging, and the inner areas between the two are literally collapsing. And by the year 2100, Texas is estimated to have a population of 96 million people living between Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and the Austin-San Antonio Metroplex. 96 million people. We're today a state of 30 million people. We're going to see a 66 million population increase over the next 70 years. How in the hell are you going to have enough water, let alone power, to drive that society? Well, again, the groundwater is going to come from the Ogallala. We're going to continue to pull it down and pull down the surface aquifers harder and harder as our populations get bigger and bigger. And yeah, you can make the argument, say it's Las Vegas, you're going to have to put, policing on the street for no longer irrigating your lawns or getting rid of lawns and all the rest is BS. But the reality is that we have to look at the fact that we have to find better solutions to protect the water we have left, let alone how to conserve it and use it better effectively. Now, the contamination side is occurring in the Ogallala. The conversation in Texas, mostly with the groundwater contamination in the 4 counties I listed, are primarily into the Rustler, what's called the Santa Rosa, and the Pecos Valley alluvium, which are the top 3 aquifers in West Texas. The Ogallala is further to the east and a little bit further to the north in Texas, kind of up in the northern section of the state. But the reality is that there are still thousands and thousands of wells that are drilled throughout the Ogallala resource. There are thousands and thousands of saltwater disposal wells that are injecting water into that zone below the Ogallala. And the reality is that the scenarios, while they're not as extreme as what we're seeing in West Texas, that is starting to occur in those regions. So the state is literally, and by the way, a lot of people also don't know this, that Texas also, because we really don't give a damn about the environment from a state perspective, New Mexico put hard limitations on their saltwater disposal and their oil and gas production in the Permian. Well, guess where the water went for not shutting off New Mexico production? It came to Texas. There are literally hundreds of lines laid across the Texas-New Mexico border through Carlsbad and the northern side of the kind of flat section of Texas that dumps water into Texas. And Oklahoma said, cool, we'll do the same thing. And now Louisiana's doing it. So we basically also have not only our own production problem, we're also taking the toxic waste from Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana also into Texas. It's a catastrophic environment. And again, it's not just the old oil well problem. It's the fact that we are totally blatantly looking at this from a wrong perspective of what's this going to look like 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now.
Yeah, clearly, and I could see that that's generally the theme, or that's floating above the words you're going through when you describe the details of this crisis, is that it's the paradigm as a whole that's the problem. That we don't have a modality of thinking that will allow for the solving of the problem, and in that sense, I was happy, Monty, that you asked the question that you did, especially referring to the North American Water and Power Alliance, because our current society doesn't have, I don't think, within it the ability to generate such a bold solution concept continentally as the North American Water and Power Alliance. When you look at the damn blueprint for this beautiful thing, embedded within it is an intention to really think like multi-generationally, really solve future problems. And I was curious, Bill, have you looked at the North American, the NWAPA design at all?
I haven't, and I'll tell you it's going to be on my research today. I'm going to rabbit hole that, and thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll send you a couple of links to some interesting
awesome
things.
But you're absolutely right. That's what we need, Matt. That's exactly what we need to look at from a statewide, and again, from the future of how we're addressing this. We need to look at our power and water, because, like I say to folks, the things after traveling the world and being in 65 countries is that low cost energy is the first and foremost criteria to any successful society. Access to fresh water, the ability to feed your people, high quality distributed medical, high quality distributed education, working infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and transportation systems, heavy rail, et cetera, right? And when we look at those societies and we say what's successful, well, Texas is not first world. The United States is not first world. We have shitty infrastructure falling apart. We've got pollution of our groundwater. We don't have the ability to truly just feed our own people. There's lots of areas where we cannot grow food and we cannot manage things. And of course, our energy system is failing, as witnessed in Texas, where when the Storm Uri and several other incidents since. So there's this argument that if North America wants to maintain its quote, quote, first world status, we have to address the fundamentals. And that thinking, that globalized thinking, that futuristic thinking of what is it going to look like designing systems for 20, 50, 100 years from now, we need to shift our entire perspective and mentality. And somehow pay for the legacy,
right?
Which is not going to be cheap or easy.
Absolutely. Kevin, you could do your follow-up.
Okay. So we talked earlier about the pressure problem. So I think I get a pretty good sense of it. You also mentioned earlier that because of that, the ground is getting up. From what, 5 inches you said, or more?
Yeah, that's the estimate. I'll send you the Wall Street Journal article. We'll tag you on that one, and It talks about the elevation change. It's mind blowing.
Okay, which must have like a destructive impact on infrastructure, I guess. By the fact that it's de-leveling, right? Okay, so I understand the basic concept behind that. What I don't get is the earthquake part. Can you go a little deeper into this part? Because, if I play devil's advocate, I would say, well, how do you know that it's this wastewater that is causing the earthquake, right?
Great question. And so that's the first and foremost thing that I just sent you the link for the Wall Street Journal. What we have found is that the epicenters are directly coordinated to the areas of high rate water injection. When we go back and look at, for example, the Garden Fields district outside of Midland, Texas, and the 5.3 magnitude earthquake that occurred, its epicenter occurred in the exact area of the water injections. So we know that these areas of earthquakes generating in West Texas are truly related to the saltwater disposal. And in 2009, the University of Texas, and I think it was not St. Mary's, it was another university that has a great geophysics department. They started studying the size and scale of the problems and published their report in 2017. The number of earthquakes that naturally occurred in West Texas from like a 3.0 magnitude went from, in those kind of general counties of Reeves, Ward, Crane, and Pecos, went from something like 6 to 10 earthquakes a year to 2,900 earthquakes a year by 2017. And again, what was the correlating factor? Well, it was hard to deny the fact that saltwater disposal and saltwater injection had been greatly increased in those vicinities. So, there's a lot of, you're absolutely right. There is arguments of, can you really prove it's related to saltwater disposal? And again, in a technical response, no, because we don't really understand how the earthquakes actually occur. Nobody is there to actually have monitors in place to actually say, this is directly how the earth broke. But what we do know is that there is no question that there is a correlation between saltwater injection and changing both the earth pressure and seeing now the elevation change due to the satellites and seeing the correlation to the increase in the number of earthquakes. So I think reasonably you could make the argument that there may be a correlation directly and that there's a causation between the correlations. The last link I sent you from the physics.org article gives you the photo of the size of the problem. And again, this is something that is just, it's hard to get your head wrapped around. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you'd say that's not reasonably possible. And that's just from 2017. That doesn't extend on the last 7 years worth of data. So we definitely have a massive, massive problem that is got to be addressed. And again, we're sacrificing the driver of this economic model of production in Texas, and Texas now being the largest single producer. The United States is now the biggest producer in the world, even surpassing Saudi Arabia. But we're doing it at what cost?
And my next question regarding this was, and you answered it, was, do we know like the physics of the process? And we don't. Are there people working on this problem, looking at how this might be occurring?
Yes. So there's, and I don't want to take the thunder away from lots of PhD students who will be writing their theses over the next century for describing the epicenter of the greatest environmental disaster in America's history. But yes, there are lots of folks that are studying and researching and trying to understand the mechanisms. And there's lots of different theses between the overinjection of the deep rock is causing the Permian to slip. And there's arguments that it's overpressuring of the shallow. And again, there's lots of different theses going on about
like two layers sliding on top of each other's.
Yep. They even call it lubricating. They're lubricating ancient faults that existed 100 million years ago from all this additional water change. And again, may be correct. It may be thesis. It may never be provable. But the reality is that where we stand today is that we have a legacy of hundreds of thousands of oil wells drilled in West Texas. We've got a proven groundwater contamination of 500,000 acres and growing that is getting worse, and we're not going to stop production. So where does this train finally come off the tracks? That's the question.
Well, thank you. I'll get back in queue just in case somebody else has questions, but I would have some other questions to ask you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
This question I have might be maybe a little superficial, but I was just reading this morning. I got a little feed on my phone describing a discovery last year, but made by a team of geologists at, I forget which university. I didn't pull it up while I was. It's kind of a spontaneous thought, and they basically said that they found solid evidence for something like an ocean the size of something like 3 times the world's oceans, deep, like 700 miles underground, like so deep underground, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what techniques they were using, sonar. I don't really know how they came to this conclusion, but I know you have a lot of discussions around. Ellen Brown wrote a piece on various deep water reservoirs, deep water aquifers that are far below the standard model descriptions of groundwater in general. And I don't want to make it superficial to make it sound like, hey, like every little kid has backup teeth that come through after you rot the first ones away. But maybe, I don't know. I hear these things and I'm thinking, well, maybe we're given maybe a second chance to screw up in a sloppy industrial learning phase, and then maybe we have this deeper water system inside of the earth as a gift to the next phase of our wake up. I don't know. Have you thought about any of these things at all, or?
Yeah, so I it's not really a superficial question. I really do think that there is the hydrological cycle on this earth is designed the way it's designed. And, we are very fortunate to have in a lot of environments usable water. Now, what we know so far is that our freshest waters occur the shallowest to the surface. That's not to say that there isn't potentiality of either changing or finding other resources. The problem comes into the cost of extraction, and it's an economic response. So at some point, what's the cost of water to afford the extraction to go ultra deep or to find these other alternative water sources? And that's the conundrum. And again, lots of people are trying to solve the problem by condensation. They're trying to create, cooling systems to create fresh water from air. And again, nothing wrong with the condensation cycle. You're just electrically driving the natural cycle from atmospheric evaporation. Great, no problem. There's lots of people looking at desalination. And again, the only problem with desalination is the discharge, because it's not the process of removing the salt and the toxins. It's the idea of what do you do about the concentration of the brines, and what do you do with that water? Because if you dump it back in the ocean, you change the salinity. People, again, having spent time working in Kuwait and a lot of my years in the Middle East, people don't appreciate that 20 years ago, when the desalination plants really started kicking off in the Persian Gulf, the salinity level of the Persian Gulf has changed dramatically. It's gone up 5,000 part per million over the last 25 years. That is and now also because of Iraq and Iran's growth as well, the amount of water that flushes down the Euphrates and flushes out the Persian Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz has greatly reduced. So it's also not getting flushed out as well. But we have fundamentally changed the salinity of the Persian Gulf. And we have to look at desalination technologies and say, look, it's necessary for survival in very arid and dry climates. But the idea that we are affecting it from a larger, longer term scale of the Persian Gulf has major consequences as well. If you make the argument of, well, eventually it'll hit the Indian Ocean and it's a huge body of water, you're absolutely right. It would dilute itself out. But right now there isn't a flushing mechanism to get that higher salinity out of the Persian Gulf. We have to look at these arguments from the longer, bigger perspective and say, what are we going to do about water? What are we going to do for agricultural products growing? Like, we do not need to grow rice in West Texas. I hate to say this if people love almonds, but we sure as hell don't need to be growing almonds in California. Almonds are one of the most water intensive crops of a fruiting tree to use, right? And yet we all love almonds, but we grow it in a dry, arid environment in California. Like, who in the hell thought that was a good idea? I wouldn't try to grow sugarcane in West Texas. I wouldn't try to grow rice in West Texas. And yet here we are we're growing cotton and we're growing sweet corn all throughout Texas, and wonder why our water resources are getting stripped down, let alone contaminated, right? So we have this failure of the whole entire endemic system to say, how are we going to manage our water, our energy, our agricultural systems over the next 25, 50 years?
Absolutely. Amen. Let's do one last shout out to anybody who has a question that they've been aching to get off their chest, because there's no more.
I do.
Oh, okay, Kevin, of course, go for it.
Well, unless Arlen and Cynthia.
Oh, Arlen and Cynthia have one too. Okay, so let's go to Arlen and Cynthia. Then Kevin, you can do your last follow up. Arlen, but you guys are on mute. Yes, there you are.
Okay. We're old.
There we go. Sorry about that. So with reference and respect to Cynthia, not my Cynthia, but your Cynthia, Matt, Cynthia Chung, some of what she's covered, and not necessarily specific to this topic, but that it's something that's sort of burgeoning in my consciousness right now, that the creativity of man, the creativity potential to solve problems, to come up with solutions to these things. There's one side of the fence where you can go, oh, it's all going to hell in a handbasket, and it's too late now. There's all these holes, and it's just gonna be a catastrophe, and we're done. But it's even the example that this Cynthia gave earlier about her dad's business with this casing of these pipes. 20 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, that would have seemed impossible to go into a failing water supply or plumbing issue and go underground without even digging a hole and repairing that line so that it's brought fully back to service, and even cheaper and faster than the old way. And so Cynthia has talked, back to Matt, Cynthia Chung has talked about that creativity and that potential for human development and human growth. I think the one that I was referencing in my mind is her talk about what's happening in Africa and different things there. But and specifically, actually, it was an interview I'm remembering now, where this notion that the earth doesn't have the potential to produce enough food for all the people, and the reason people are starving is because there isn't enough food production. Of course, that's not true. It's all politically based. And so this issue where there is this challenge, and pardon me if I didn't get all of this, I've been in and out doing gardening, hence the hat. But anyway, the potential solutions, like it sounds like what's been offered so far, is that there isn't a solution to this clear and present problem. And so, like you said, that a number of theses are going to be written about this over the next decade and on. I think that it will only be through that creativity and what other people, I've heard a few people, as I say, in and out, I've heard a few other people commenting on changing the paradigm of what's the word I'm looking for? The significance, or what's the most important thing to do. Well, right now, what's the most important thing to do? Get that oil out of the ground and print those dollars, and let's go. Let's get the money going. Jordan Peterson talks about how the evolution of, I hate that word, the advancement of the human species recently has brought more and more people out of poverty. More and more people aren't starving. The health and well-being of more and more people on the planet, although the last couple of years, maybe not quite at the same rate that it has in the past for various reasons, but that's what I think we have to rely on. And it's not something to discount, meaning, oh, it'll get sorted out when it becomes more important and everybody's farm field is full of salt and isn't growing food and people are starving. Oh, well, then we'll solve it. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but I don't have anything to add or put in other than that hopefulness that the bud of anything is possible, that we can come up with a solution. But as you're bringing to the table, hey, everybody, there's a problem here, and we need to look at it now.
Okay, but
go first.
Okay, go
ahead.
So let me address the first part, because you're exactly right. So, in June of 2021, it was the eureka moment for me to actually see ground zero of the very first 2 zombie wells and the size and the extent of the problem. And having followed it over the last 3 years, along with my other work and jobs and assignments, it's been mind-blowing to see how this problem is getting bigger and where we're headed, right? So yes, there is this, you're 100% right, and Matt started it off with, the first part is it's awareness. How you got to be aware of there's a problem before you can address it. So we're still struggling to get awareness to the audiences and people who care and people who can see beyond today's problems to tomorrow, to see the fact that we're leaving a legacy for the next 50, 100,000 years that is going to be a hell of a problem to solve. Now, past that, yes, the reason why I ran for political office for the Railroad Commission, the Texas Railroad Commission, which is the executive position in the state of Texas, and it was the only one on this ballot, was for the fact that it was to bring awareness to the narrative. It was to actually elevate the argument to a statewide perspective to people who had no idea. I did 220 events, 91 counties across the state of Texas, drove 40,000 kilometers, and put my own money on the line to sell the message to the general public of, do you understand this isn't just about whether you can turn your lights on or whether you can afford your electricity bill. My race is about whether you're going to be able to drink the water,
right,
and it's safe enough to drink. Like this is the scale of where we really are in Texas. So I got 38 endorsements. I won all major newspaper endorsements from Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth. Still lost the election 2-1 because I'm not a woman and a Democrat. So there you go. But besides the gender bias that exists in the Democratic Party, the reality is that, it was the exact purpose of why I ran was for doing something, was to say, could I help regulate the problem, to help get the right people to the table, to have the right conversation, to get the funding in place, to get solutions get creative people to the table to get working on the problem, right? That didn't work. It failed. I had a lot of success, and a lot of people said my campaign was extraordinarily successful in the sense that I changed the narrative, right? And I was able to get that story out. The problem is that we still have a problem. And to me now, it's the engineering hat. So I got to switch my hats off from being the politician back to the engineer. And that's exactly what I'm working on. I'm looking at this now and saying, okay, it's time to get creative and say, what can we do to help solve? The first and foremost is, how do we solve the production problem? Because we're not going to stop production. We have to find a way to stop the injection of what we're currently producing and find a scalable, workable solution to manage that over the next 10, 20 years. At some point, then we have to address the legacy problem. We have to start looking at what we've already contaminated. How do we clean it up? And then also, how do we start to draw down these pressures before it eventually becomes a catastrophic event? In the meantime, we have to continue what we're doing because the rate of water production is so big. I tell people 24 million barrels a day is 400 city of Houston's entire yearly water supply. We could build 400 city of Houston's throughout Texas with the amount of produced water we manage just in Texas alone. We are the epicenter of the water problem beyond everybody else. But we have to have better solutions in place, and we have to be creative. And to that point, you're 100% correct. The creativity side now is what needs to happen. We need to implement technologies and solutions, get the investment funding and the federal monies involved to help start to offset the size and scale of the problem that's going to come. That has to happen. And so again, that's the next step for me. Is the political world sucks, and I'll be honest, I'm probably grateful I didn't win. To be a politician is certainly, I'm too blunt and too straightforward to be a politician. So, but again, it was about selling the narrative. It was about changing the story and about taking action and doing something that nobody else would do.
Okay, so just before she takes over, quick thing then is, so although you campaigned well, represented well, had support, you're not a woman or some other, minority of some sort that gets the go ahead. I guess the thing that comes back around on that for me in that element is the potential, whoever did make it and whoever did get voted in was playing a tune and running a narrative that was supportive of existing industry and existing, well, in this specific issue, existing destruction, existing harm.
Oh, you'll love this then. So I don't want to get into the whole politics side. That's a whole nother Zoom call for another day. But I got at the very last minute. So I announced my campaign on November 14th, really at the start of the open season to announce my campaign. On the very last day, the Republicans put a lifetime long Republican as a Democrat. The Democratic Party accepted her money, and they let her run against me as a Democrat, as a lifetime Republican. She did no events. She spent no money, and she won 2-1. I got 300,000 votes. She got 660,000 votes. And I basically lost 2-1 because she was a woman as a lifetime Republican. And I interviewed lots of folks after the campaign cycle and said, why did you vote for her? Did you know, first of all, did you know anything about me or her? The answer, of course, was no. Did you know anything about the issues in Texas and the policies and what we ran on? The answer, of course, was no. Some people, so I liked your name. I voted for you for that. Or I had other people say, I think a man should be an engineer, should be, because it's called the Texas Railroad Commission.
Right.
I don't think that women should run rail cars as engineers. And then I had lots of people say, well, we just need more women in politics and the political field isn't balanced. And I said, well, did you know she's a lifetime Republican? Oh, so now you have buyer's remorse because you were actually unelected populace who's actually voting. And the hard reality of the political world, and again, we can sidetrack this conversation, but is that the founding fathers created this country that you had to be an esquire, you had to be a landowner or highly educated to be a voter. Mm-hmm. A democracy, a constitutional republic only works if you have an educated, informed populace. The idea that we're going to have a general democracy of people who, A, first of all, don't show up to vote, but B, don't know what they're voting on and don't know how to vote and don't even know the system and who the people are, doesn't benefit us at all. I was the most highly qualified candidate that has run for the Oil and Gas Commissioner in the state of Texas that anybody can remember in a lifetime. And yet I didn't even get close to getting through the primary. And she's a Republican running now in the November, and she's not doing any events because, again, the Republicans put her up against me to beat me on the primary because that got me out of the way. So the Republicans will hold their control of the Texas and life will stay on as it is in Texas.
But at least they voted, Bill. At least they voted.
Until, of course, they go to turn the tap on and no water comes out. I mean, then, people's tune will change pretty quick at that point.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And that's the whole problem of the parties and the political messaging. And look, it was a hell of a graduate education in political office and politics, because learning that you have to boil these messages down so simplicity to the voter to explain to them, how does it impact you financially, health-wise, or personally, is the extent of where we are in our society. And the problem with it is that, so regulatory-wise, nothing's going to change. The opportunity, it was great at learning experience, would never do it again, but now it's time to get back to problem solving on the engineering side.
Okay, so on that note, my people were creative problem solvers, and that's how they're who they are and what they are right now. Now they're old and dementia-y, and so now it's me, or possibly me. I learned well from that whole thing and would like to engage in what is the trajectory next for this particular corp.
So I'll send my email here into the group, and your guys are more than welcome to reach out and we can continue it. There is a opportunity here to definitely identify and come up with solutions globally. And the idea that water is going to be a major issue is undeniable. Speaking of water, we've got the hurricane coming through. Hurricane Beryl is just started, and the dog is starting to freak from the thunder. So
okay,
gonna have to wrap up here in just a minute because
that's good. Yeah,
she's starting to lose her mind.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, that's quite the ironic way to end this presentation. Actually, I appreciate that. All right, Bill. No, thank you very much for donating this time and really just awakening a lot of points of thought, of discussion that have to be had, that have to be discussed, thought through, and let's do a follow up in the coming months ahead, if that's okay with you. I'd love to see where this conversation can go, and especially on the solution front, different alternatives, the ways of thinking about big solutions. I think is a discussion that we need to have more of this. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Bill.
You guys are more than welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And again, we have the ability to solve the problems. Everybody's correct, but we have to come up with ways to do it. And hopefully in the near future, we will.
Amen. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.